How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem Vav, Daf 46 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, Daf Mem Vav is mamash gevalt, very, very menachisi, very, very zvachim menachis kodshimi. We continue talking about the Shtei Halechem and the kivsei atzeres. Yesterday we saw a machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Reb Shimon ben Nanas. Also Reb Shimon ben Yochai weighed in, but we're really gonna the sort of the framing of the machlokas tends to really focus more on Rabbi Akiva and Reb Shimon ben Nanas about whether you could theoretically bring the Shtei Halechem alone without the kivsei atzeres, like Rabbi Akiva says, or if you could bring the kivsei atzeres alone without the Shtei Halechem, like Reb Shimon ben Nanas says. The first part of the first chunk, the first half-ish of our daf is going to focus on when kivsei atzeres and Shtei Halechem get locked in together. Okay? So while we saw this machlokas yesterday between Rabbi Akiva and Reb Shimon ben Nanas about can you bring one without the other, if you have both of them at a certain point, they get locked in together, and that you at a certain point you need to then have both of them if you had both of them up until that point. What is that point? And we will discuss the sort of the machlokas, the context and scope of that machlokas is broadening, and we will be learning all about that. And the second topic on today's daf is why we burn Shtei Halechem that are brought alone. Assuming like Rabbi Akiva that the Shtei Halechem can in fact be brought alone. So what happens? You know, we've talked many a time about the kivsei atzeres being matir the Shtei Halechem, that the slaughtering of the kivsei atzeres and the zrikas adam of the kivsei atzeres allows the Shtei Halechem to be eaten by the kohanim. What happens if the Shtei Halechem is being brought alone? Like Rabbi Akiva says, that is a possibility. So what happens? Do you eat the Shtei Halechem, not eat the Shtei Halechem? We're going to see that you burn it. Why do you burn it? So friends, a very korbanis-oriented daf. Let's jump in. Friends, we begin all the way at the bottom of Memhei Amid Beis, mamish all the way at the bottom. Amr B'Yechon HaKomodim, now we are on Mem Vav Amid Aleph. Shem Huzkiku Ze Loze Shema'akvin Ze Es Ze Ve'ezeu Zika Sheloin Shrita. Let's read that again. Amr B'Yechon says B'Yechon HaKomodim. Everybody agrees, right? So even though we had this machlokes yesterday between Rabbi Akiva, who says that you could technically bring the Shtei Halechem alone, and Reb Shimon ben Nanas, who says that you could technically bring the kivsei atzeres alone. However, right now, and the inverse is also true, right? Rabbi Akiva says you cannot bring the kivsei atzeres alone, and Reb Shimon ben Nanas says you cannot bring the Shtei Halechem alone. Okay. However, everyone agrees, Rabbi Akiva, ben Nanas, she'im that if they become dependent on one another, locked in with one another, at that point you need both of them. So at a certain point, if you have the Shtei Halechem and you have the kivsei atzeres, beautiful, perfect. Now at a certain point, even though Rabbi Akiva says you could technically bring the Shtei Halechem alone, Banana says you could technically bring the kivsei atzeres alone. At a certain point, if up until that point you had both the Shtei Halechem and the kivsei atzeres, you got to go ad sof. If you then lose the Shtei Halechem at that point, or if you lose the kivsei atzeres at that point, or if they become tamei or whatever it might be, so then you got to start over, right? If you lose the kivsei atzeres, so then the Shtei Halechem, you just burn it and begin again. So what is that point? What's the point where they get locked in? Ve'ezeh hu, and what is this point? Ve'ezu zika shelen. What is that point where they become dependent on each other? Shrita. The answer is shrita, says Rabbi Yochanan. That once the kivsei atzeres have been slaughtered, and there's the Shtei Halechem there at the same time, you have kivsei atzeres, you have Shtei Halechem, you slaughtered the kivsei atzeres. At that point, you need both of them. If one of them gets lost, you got to start all over again. They asked in Eretz Yisrael, Tnufa, osa zika, eno osa zika. What about tnufa? Shtei Halechem and kivsei atzeres require tnufa, which we'll learn about on Daf Samech Aleph, in a Mishnah on Daf Samech Aleph. Although it is a little tricky, we're really going to have to wait until Daf Samech Beis in order to learn more of the details about this tnufa. It's a little bit tricky because you have the Shtei Halechem and you have the kivsei atzeres that are waved together. What does waved mean? Forwards, backwards, up and down. Maile umorid, molich umevi, maile umorid. Maybe it's maile umorid, molich umevi. Front, back, up, down. Now, the thing is that the kivsei atzeres, the sheep, are waved when they are alive. So you have these live sheep, you have these breads, you're waving them. How do you wave them? We'll get there on Daf Samech Beis. We'll get into the details of how exactly it works. For now, let's just say it requires tenufa. It requires waving. That you wave the kivsei atzeres together with the Shtei Halechem. The question is, post-waving, does that create a zika? Rabbi Yochanan has said that shchita creates a zika. That once the kivsei atzeres are slaughtered, the kivsei atzeres and the Shtei Halechem become dependent, locked in with each other. In Eretz Yisrael, they wanted to know, what about post-tenufa? Tenufa is before the shchita of the kivsei atzeres. So post-tenufa, post-waving, do the kivsei atzeres and the Shtei Halechem get locked in? So again, Omar Ula says, Ula, bo b'mayrova, they asked in Eretz Yisrael, Tenufa ose zika o eno ose zika, does tenufa make a zika between the Shtei Halechem and the lechem, and the Shtei Halechem and the kivsei atzeres? Does the tenufa make a zika or not? Pshotle mid Rabbi Yochanan. Well, why don't we suggest an answer based on what Rabbi Yochanan had just said? Dam Rabbi Yochanan shchita ose zika. Well, Rabbi Yochanan had said that it is the slaughtering of the kivsei atzeres that makes the zika, implying that up until then there is no zika. So post tenufa, pre shchita, there is no zika. Michlad tenufa eno ose zika. So as we just said, it's the shchita that makes the zika, not the tenufa. The Rabbi Yochanan gufa ka mi boile. The thing is, it's that's the question. The question, he asked the question about tenufa, but kind of built into the question was also a question about what exactly is Rabbi Yochanan's shita b'chlal. Mifshad pshita leil Rabbi Yochanan de shchita osa zika v'tenufenos osa zika. When Rabbi Yochanan says that shchita creates a zika, that the shchita of the kivsei atzeres creates a zika between the Shtei Halechem and the kivsei atzeres, is that kilu 100%, 100%, that it is the shchita that makes the zika and not the tenufa? O dilma shchita pshita le usnufa masapkale. Or maybe, no, Rabbi Yochanan is going with the safe psak. He's saying, look, I know for sure that shchita makes a zika, but that's for sure. If you have the Shtei Halechem and you have the kivsei atzeres, and the kivsei atzeres have already been slaughtered, yeah, okay, for sure there's a zika. I can tell you that for sure. Now, in terms of, does tenufa make a zika? Maybe Rabbi Yochanan himself is unsure. And that's what they were asking about in Eretz Yisrael. What about the tenufa? So that's the shayla, right? So we wanted to say, based on Rabbi Yochanan who says that shchita makes a zika, well, it's the shchita, it's not the tenufa. But wait, maybe Rabbi Yochanan himself wasn't actually sure about the tenufa. So he went with the shchita. He said, look, for sure, post-shchita, there's a zika. What about post-tenufa? I don't know. So that's the question. Is Rabbi Yochanan saying for sure post-tenufa no? Or is he saying I'm not sure about post-tenufa teku? It's a tie. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina l'Ravuna b'Rei Rav Yeshua, says Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina t'Ravuna b'Rei Rav Yeshua. He asked a very gewaldige question. A very gewaldige question with a little bit of a tricky answer. The gewaldige question is, V'ki ksiv kodesh yu la'Hashem la'koyin b'asa tenufa ksiv. That's a gewaldige question. Who wants to explain to us the question while I take a sip of water? Yesterday we had seen a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Nanis with regard to the pasuk that says, and I quote, "Ve'henif hakohen osam," that the kohen waves the kivsei atzeres, Halechem bikurim with the shtey Halechem, tenufa lefnei Hashem, al shnei ksovim, kvosim, kodesh yu Hashem lakohen. There was a big machlokes yesterday between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Nanis about how to understand kodesh yu Hashem lakohen. Rabbi Akiva wanted to say that it's a reference to the shtey Halechem, that you could bring the shtey Halechem alone. Ben Nanis wanted to say that it's a reference to the kivsei atzeres, so you could bring the kivsei atzeres alone. So what do we see? The fact that Ben Nanis and Rabbi Akiva are arguing about that pasuk about kodesh yu Hashem lakohen, Rabbi Akiva says you could bring the shtey Halechem alone. Ben Nanis says you could bring the kivsei atzeres alone. Clearly, we're talking about where there's no zika yet. We're talking about a scenario where it's not too late to just be able to bring shtey Halechem, or to be able to bring just kivsei atzeres, which clearly therefore indicates, and no, I don't think I said this yet, or pointed this out yet. What's this pasuk talking about? This pasuk is talking about tenufa. Ve'henif hakohen osam. We're talking about tenufa, and it says then at the end of the pasuk, kodesh yu Hashem lakohen. So we want to say from there that we're talking about after the tenufa, kodesh yu Hashem lakohen. After the tenufa, there's still a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Nanis about whether you could just bring the shtey Halechem or just bring the kivsei atzeres, implying that the tenufa does not make a zika, because if it did, how could they still be arguing about if you could just bring one of them alone? It would be too late. Again, Amalei Reb Yehuda bar Chanina li Rav Huna bar Yeshua ve'aki ksiv, that kodesh yu Hashem lakohen baser tenufa ksiv. That pasuk that we saw at the end of the daf yesterday, kodesh yu Hashem lakohen, that Rabbi Akiva says that we see from there that the shtey Halechem can be brought alone. Ben Nanis says that we see from there that the kivsei atzeres can be brought alone. Baser tenufa ksiv, that's written at the end of the pasuk about tenufa. After the tenufa, uflige Ben Nanis Rabbi Akiva, and yet Ben Nanis and Rabbi Akiva are still arguing, implying that there is no zika yet. Uletaimich says the Gemara. One second. One second. Basar tenufa v'lo basar shchita. You're telling me that pasuk is dafka talking about specifically after tenufa, but not after shchita? Meaning, what's the pasuk saying? Kodesh yu Hashem lakohen. That the shtey Halechem and the kivsei atzeres go to the Kohanim. Now, they don't go to the Kohanim yet, if we're only talking about after tenufa. When do korbanos become mutter to the Kohanim? After Zrikas Adam. So when we say kodesh yu Hashem lakohen, and that the Kohanim get the shtey Halechem, and that the Kohanim get the meat of the kivsei atzeres, it's clearly not talking about simply after tenufa before shchita. It's talking about after shchita, after Zrikas Adam, I imagine more specifically. So therefore, the fact that the pasuk is talking about matnos kehuna, and those matnos kehuna belong to the Kohanim not after tenufa but after shchita. So even though the pasuk is written in the context of the tenufa and right after the tenufa, it's talking about after shchita. What do you have to say? Meikara kai. Sure, the pasuk is talking about before shchita, but umay kodesh yu Hashem lakohen. What does it mean that it's matnos kehuna goes to the Kohanim? Davar shesofo lakohen, something that ultimately is going to go to the Kohanim after shchita. So achanami davar shesofa lakohen, also here as well, in terms of does it create a zika or not, we're talking about kodesh yu Hashem lakohen, about which Rabbi Akiva and Ben Nanis argue about can it just be the shtey Halechem or can it just be the lechem upon him? That's not talking about this point in time after tenufa before shchita. It's talking about the shtey Halechem and the kivsei atzeres that ultimately will be able to be eaten by the Kohen at some later point, and they're arguing about if the shtey Halechem or the kivsei atzeres can come alone, but they aren't specifically talking about this particular point in time after the tenufa, if yet it creates a zika or not. They aren't arguing about that. They are talking about the concept of the shtey Halechem, of the kivsei atzeres, that will ultimately be eaten as matnas kahuna by the kohanim. But again, it is not specifically a reference to this point in time, as per the fact that it isn't yet going to the kohanim yet. It's going to the kohanim later. So even though this pasuk is written post tenufa, it isn't necessarily making a statement about what applies at this moment post tenufa pre shrita. And therefore, it is inconclusive about if the tenufa itself makes a zika or not. Now the Gemara turns to shrita itself and questions whether even shrita really creates a zika. Ushrita osa zika? Does even shrita itself create this connection between the shtey Halechem and the kivsei atzeres that they become dependent on one another? But we have a contradiction from a korban toda. Of course, a korban toda is a type of a shlamim that is offered with 40 loaves of bread. So, similar to the shtey Halechem and the kivsei atzeres, we have an element of animal sacrifice as well as these breads. Achelo shochata nifras lachma, if prior to shchita. So basically, we're going to go through three very similar and with one changing variable scenarios. The changing variables are going to be in scenario number one, that one of the loaves of bread broke. In scenario number two, one of the loaves of bread was kivsei, was taken out of the azara. Or I think actually, no, when it comes, well, I think it's probably a shaila maybe before shchita, but possibly outside of Yerushalayim. Basically, it was taken out of a place where it needs to be limited to. It goes outside of where it's allowed to be, because korban toda is kachim kalam, and therefore ultimately korban toda is going to be anywhere in Yerushalayim. So the shaila is kivsei, whether it's outside of Yerushalayim or it's come up in the past about if it's before Zrikas Adam, if it's even leaving the Azar. Anyways, if it has been kivsei from a place that is beyond where it is allowed to be. And the third one is that it becomes tummy. Okay, so variable number one is that one of the breads broke. Variable number two, one of the breads was taken out of where it's allowed to be. And variable number three is one of the breads became tummy. Now, so we're going to basically have one scenario, and then we're going to have the same scenario a second time and a third time with one changing variable in each scenario. Here we go. We have a contradiction. If prior to shchita of the korban toda, one of the 40 loaves broke, nisht geferlich, yavi lechem acher. So you haven't done shchita yet, so just fix it. Bring a new bread that is whole. And now all of your breads are whole, and shech the korban, and everything is 100% a-okay. So yavi lechem acher v'shoichet. Now mishe shochata. Okay, now things get more serious over here. Now you already slaughtered the korban toda. You have not yet done zrikas adam. Post shchita, pre zrika, and one of the breads now breaks. So now what happens? Nifras lachma, one of the breads breaks. Hadam yizark. You can move forward with the zrikas hadam. So what's interesting here is that, and we're going to point this out later, is that we're talking about post shchita. So you're ready to shchita, and yet we're saying that even though one of the breads broke, you can continue doing the zrikas hadam. The abasa yochel, and the basar can be eaten. So Rashi says that right, Adam yizark l'shem shlamim v'lo l'shem toda. That so you slaughtered the toda, one of the breads then broke. So Rashi says, so the Brisa says that you can continue with zrikas adam, but Rashi points out that the zrikas adam would no longer be as a toda, since one of the breads broke, but rather as a shlam, since a toda is a type of shlam. V'abasa yochel, you can eat the meat. V'dei nidra lo yatsa. But the fact that he said, I'm going to bring a korban toda, he does not absolve himself of that obligation, does not satisfy that obligation to have brought a korban toda if prior to Zrikas Adam one of the breads broke. Again, you can continue doing Zrikas Adam. You can even eat the meat, but you're not going to be yotzei for bringing a korban toda. Ve'alechem pasul, and all of the 40 loaves are pasul. You can't eat those either. Now, nizrak adam, if the toda was slaughtered, there was already Zrikas Adam. Now there are 40 breads. One of them breaks. Okay, not a big deal. It's after Zrikas Adam. Now the thing is, there's one concern, and that concern is that of the 40 loaves, 4 of them, of course, the 40 loaves are made up of 10 loaves of each of 4 types of loaves. Right? There's 4 types of loaves of bread, 10 of each. One of those 10 of each goes to the kohen, is given as a gift to the kohanim. So you slaughtered the korban toda, you did Zrikas Adam for the korban toda, you have these 40 loaves, one of them breaks. So in terms of the 4 that you're going to give to the kohen, don't give them the broken one. Torah min hasholim alaparus, that the truma, i.e. the 4 loaves that are going to be given to the kohanim, give them from the whole ones, don't give them a broken one. Now, that was when one of the breads breaks. What happens if one of the breads is taken out of where it's allowed to be? So if prior to shchita, one of the breads went out beyond where it's allowed to be, there was no shchita yet, it wasn't made kadosh yet, no big deal. Machnisa, just bring it in to where it's supposed to be, v'shochet, and then continue and slaughter the korban toda. No big deal, okay, 100%. Mishashachata, what about after shchita, before Zrikas Adam, yotza lachma, one of the breads went out to beyond where it's allowed to be. So Adam Yizarik, so do Zrikas Adam, Rashi points out, as a korban shlomim, not as a korban toda. V'aboso yochel, you can eat the meat. V'dei nidro lo yotza, but you are not yotzei for the net that you said I'm going to bring a korban toda. Halechem pasul, and all of the bread is pasul, you can't eat it. Nizrak Adam, now if you slaughtered the korban toda, you even did Zrikas Adam, and then one of the breads was taken out beyond where it's allowed to be, so then again, Torei mima shebifnim al shebachutz. So again, so we have these 40 breads, 4 of them are going to go to the Kohanim, give to the Kohanim from the breads that remained in where they're allowed to be, rather than the one that's pasul biyotze. Separate the truma from the ones that are kosher, and give those to the Kohen. Ad shelo shochata nitma lachma. Now moving on to when the bread becomes tamei. So if prior to the shchita of the korban toda, one of the breads became tamei, and this is before the shchita, nish geferlach, maybe lechem acher v'shoichet. So swap out the tamei one for a tahor one, and proceed. Do the shchita, all good, 100% okay. Mishashochato nitma lachma. If after the shchita, before the Zrikas Adam, one of the breads became tamei, hadam yizarik, you continue with the Zrikas Adam, ve'abasu ye'ochel, and the bread and the meat can be eaten. V'dei nidro yotza. So now says the Gemara, now in this case, he's actually yotzei for his neder, shatzitz miratz ala tamei, because the fact of the matter is there's the tzitz that we learn about in this week's Pasha, Pasha's Titzavet. We learn about the tzitz, that the tzitz is miratze for tumas hakochim. And therefore, in this case, he's even yotzei for his obligation of a korban toda. But lechem pasul. But the lechem is pasul. It's a little bit tricky to understand why the lechem is pasul. But anyway, it says the lechem is pasul. I don't know. I was thinking maybe because you can't eat it anyways, right? We said that tzitz is miratze in that the lechem is technically kosher, but I think you won't be able to eat it. Maybe it's pasul l'chila. I don't know. Rashi this kind of struggles with why the bread would be possible. He says it's different gears that says Davka that he's not Yotze is nether because it's according to the opinion says Tzitz is not Maratza. It's a little bit tricky to understand why the lechem would be possible. Anyways, Nizrak Adam, if after Zrikas Adam, so you have a Korban Toda, you slaughter the Korban Toda, you did Zrikas Adam, and then one of the breads become Tameh. So here as well, Tori min tahor ala Tameh. So just in terms of the 4 loaves that you're giving to the Kohen, give to the Kohen a loaf that is tahor rather than a loaf that is tameh. Okay. Now, v'isal kadaitech shchita ose zika. Now, in all of these cases, we said that if after the shchita, but prior to the zrika, the bread, one of the breads broke, was taken out where it's allowed to go, became tameh. We said in all of those cases, you can move ahead with the zrika sadam. The question is, but if you say that slaughtering it makes a zika, makes a dependency between the animal sacrifice and the breads, well then came the huskaku zeloze b'shchita ifsil lelechem tiposel nami toda. Well, once a zika has been made between the animal and the breads, well, the breads becoming possible should invalidate the entire korban. Why are you allowed to move ahead with the zrika sadam? Right, we're saying that when it comes to the shtey Halechem, when it comes to the kivsei atzeres, once there's the shchita of the kivsei atzeres, they become a unit. They become dependent on each other, the kivsei atzeres and the shtey Halechem. And if the shtey Halechem gets lost or puzzle somehow, you got to start over again. The whole thing's no good. And yet we're saying that the korban toda was slaughtered, and then one of the breads broke, and now all the breads are puzzle. No, nish gefährlich, just go weiter, du zrikas adam, ma pitom. So, and for the Gemara, right, ifzele lechem tipaso nami toda. So, and for the Gemara, shiny toda, well, toda is different to achmana karye shlomim. Well, the toda, right, a toda zevach shlomim, the pasuk says, that a toda is a type of shlomim. And therefore, ma shlomim craving below lechem, av toda craving below lechem. Just like a shlom, so since a toda is a type of shlomim, and just like a korban shlomim can be offered, right, just like a korban shlomim is offered without bread, right, bread is for a korban toda, not for a regular korban shlomim. Regular korban shlomim has no bread. So since the korban toda is in fact a type of shlomim, and shlomim are offered without bread, so even though the bread of the korban toda became possible, nish geferlach, you can still go weiter and do the zrikas adam. So again, the question is, if we're saying that shchita creates a zika, so then once you have the shchita of the korban toda, so then the bread should be part of the equation. And if one of the breads becomes possible, so then the whole korban, including the animal, everything should be possible. Why do you move out with the zrikas adam? Well, because the toda is a type of shlomim, and shlomim are offered without bread. So here, the bread became no good. Nish geferlich, just offer the korban just like you would any shlomim. Now the question obviously is, but aren't the kivsei atzeres also a shlomim? Kivsei atzeres a shamit tzibur. So why don't we say, if you lose the shtey Halechem, nish geferlich, just offer the korban, just like a regular korban shlomim. So Tosfos gives 2 answers. One is that korban shlomim and korban toda are both kachim kalim, whereas zivchei shamit tzibur are kachim. Another answer is that shlomim and toda are individual korbanos, and kivsei atzeres are communal korbanos. So therefore, meaning, if the whole reason for toda and shlomim is that they're both types of shlomim, and therefore they could be offered without bread, well, isn't the kivsei atzeres also a type of shlomim? It is a type of shlomim, but it's a different type of shlomim. It's kachim, where the others are kachim kalim. It's a korban sibur, whereas the others are korban yachid. So therefore, if after the shchita, one of the breads of the toda becomes possible, nonetheless you can continue and do zrikas adam as though it was a regular shlomim, that wouldn't apply to the kivsei atzeres. And if something happens to the kivsei atzeres or to the shtei Halechem, the entire korban would be possible if that happens after shchita, and you'd have to start all over again. Okay, moving on. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, okay. Now says Rabbi Yirmiyah, If we say that, so we had asked earlier, what about tenufa? We had said shchita creates a zika between the kivsei atzeres and the shtei Halechem. We had suggested, what about tenufa? We had asked, what about tenufa? Maybe tenufa makes a zika. And it was inconclusive. If you say that tenufa does make a zika, so avar Halechem, avdu kvasim, avar Halechem. So if you say that tenufa makes a zika, well then, if you did the tenufa with the shtei Halechem, with the kivsei atzeres, and then what did we just say? Let's go turn. If the avar Halechem, if you lose the bread, if you lose the shtei Halechem avdu kvasim, well then you lost the kvasim. You have to start all over again. Avdu kvasim, if you lose the kvasim avar Halechem, well then the shtei Halechem are also gone. You have to start all over again. However, vim timtza lomar tenufa eno os zika. Now, if you say though that the tenufa does not create the zika between the shtei Halechem and the kivsei atzeres, hevi lechem vikvasim. So if you brought the shtei Halechem and the kivsei atzeres, vihunfu, and you did tenufa, ve'avar Halechem, and then you lost the shtei Halechem, ve'evi lechem acher, and then you brought a new shtei Halechem. Okay, so again, you did tenufa. Tenufa doesn't create a zika, but you did already do the tenufa. And then after doing the tenufa, you lost the shtei Halechem. So you replaced the shtei Halechem. Okay, with different shtei Halechem. Also, Halechem ton tenufa or eno ton tenufa. So if you replace, so again, you already did tenufa with the shtei Halechem, with the kivsei atzeres, then you lost the shtei Halechem, then you brought new shtei Halechem. Do you have to redo the tenufa? That's the shaila. Also, Halechem ton tenufa or eno ton tenufa. Do you redo the tenufa with the new shtei Halechem? Avdu kvasim lo tibai lach devade ba'u tenufa. Now, if we're talking about that after the tenufa, the kvasim, the kivsei atzeres got lost, and now you brought new ones, certainly you would have to redo the tenufa, because as Rashi says, because the kivsei atzeres are matir the shtei Halechem, and therefore if we have new kivsei atzeres, we're going to have to do tenufa with them. But also va'od dibu ksiv tenufa ve'enif osam hakoyin. The pasuk Daf says ve'enif osam hakoyin. You're going to wave them, so therefore you have to make sure that you're waving the kivsei atzeres. So certainly, if post tenufa the kivsei atzeres got lost and you brought different sheep instead, you're going to have to redo the tenufa. That's of course. Kitibaylach avar Halechem. However, the question is, what about if the bread got lost? Now, again, valiba de benanis lo tibaylach damak vasim ikr. And once again, according to benanis, who says, meaning not that we've said this before, but kilu, just like before, we said that if the sheep get lost, for sure you're going to have to, of course, then you're going to have to redo the tenufa. Here we're saying that now, according to benanis, who says that the ikr is the kvasim, and we're talking about where the bread got lost and you brought replacement bread, but the kvasim are the same. You would not have to redo the tenufa because you already did the tenufa with these kvasim. The shaila is ela aliba de Rabbi Akiva. However, according to Rabbi Akiva, the Amar lechem ikr, that the shtei Halechem is the main thing, and you lost the shtei Halechem, and now you brought new ones. My cave the lechem ikr by tenufa. Do we say that since the shtei Halechem is the main thing? So by tenufa, you're gonna have to redo the tenufa with the new shtei Halechem. Odilma kevan dimatirin didei kvasim ninu. Or do we say, look, at the end of the day, it is the kivsei atzeres that are matir the shtei Halechem. So whether it's these new shtei Halechem, whether it's the old shtei Halechem, doesn't matter. The tenufa was already done with the kivsei atzeres that are going to be matir it. Lo tzarich tenufa. You don't need to redo the tenufa. Teku. We say it's a tie. Okay. So, if you say that tenufa does not make a zika, and then you did tenufa, and then you lost the shtei Halechem, and then you brought new shtei Halechem, do you have to redo the tenufa according to Rabbi Akiva? It's a tie. Amalei Abai leRava, says Abai to Rava, Maishna shnei kvasim demikadshe lechem ume'akve. So we, of course, have been saying, we've been discussing, that the kivsei atzeres, they are mekadesh, the shtei Halechem, that it's once the kivsei atzeres are slaughtered, do the shtei Halechem become kadosh, and they're ma'akev, at least according to Rabbi, either after shchita according to everybody, or before shchita according to Benanis. Umashna shiva kvasim ufar ve'elim. And now at the same time, of course, as we learned about yesterday, when it comes to the shtei Halechem, in addition to the kivsei atzeres, of course, there is the cow. There are the 2 rams. There are the 7 sheep. What about them? The olas. The lo mekadesh lechem, their slaughter is not mekadesh the shtei Halechem. V'lo me'akve, and even if you don't offer them, you could still offer the shtei Halechem. They're not me'akev the shtei Halechem at any point. How come? Why is the connection with the kivsei atzeres rather than the cow, rams, and sheep? Amalei, Rava responds, well, since the tnufa is with the kivsei atzeres, shtey in pasuk. So the Torah says that the tnufa of the shtei Halechem is with the kivsei atzeres, and because the tnufa of the shtei Halechem is with the kivsei atzeres, they have that special relationship, not the other korbanos. Varei toda. What about a korban toda? Delo is kuku zelazah b'tnufa. There's no tnufa by a korban toda. There's no tnufa by a korban toda, and nonetheless, umikadsha ma'akva. The slaughter of the korban toda is mekadesh the 40 breads. And if you don't have the animal, you wouldn't offer the breads. So here, by the korban toda, we have this similar characteristic, which is that the animal is mekadesh the bread, and that the animal is ma'akev the bread, similar to the kivsei atzeres being mekadesh the shtei Halechem, and that the kivsei atzeres are ma'akev the shtei Halechem. Right? Either after shchita according to everybody, or even before shchita according to Benanis. Ela kitoda matoda shlomim afacha nami shlomim. So rather, instead of saying because you do the tnufa with the shtei Halechem and the kivsei atzeres together, rather it's because the kivsei atzeres are shlomim. Masha einkein, all the other animals, they're olas. And since the kivsei atzeres are shlomim, so they can be compared to a korban toda, just like a korban toda is a type of shlomim. The kivsei atzeres are as well, and therefore, just like a korban toda, the kivsei atzeres are mekadesh the shtei Halechem and me'akev. Midami, but can we compare the kivsei atzeres with a regular korban toda? Hasam lekas v'cham achrine. A regular korban toda doesn't have any other korbanis. It's just the korban toda is just the animal. What's it? Probably what's a korban toda? I imagine probably any type of animal that could be used for a shlom. I imagine could be used for a toda. Anyways, but there's no other animals being offered with it. Whereas over here by the zivche by the kivsei atzeres, there's the cow, there's the sheep, there's the rams. Let's say, but in this case, where we have the cow, we have the rams, we have the sheep, they could also be mekadesh the shtei Halechem. So ela ke'el nazir, rather let's learn it out from the el nazir. Of course, a nazir, when he is done with his naziris, he brings a korban ola, he brings I believe korban chatas, and a korban shlomim. So the el nazir, which is a korban shlomim, ma'il nazir afal gav di'ikas v'acham achrine shlomim hu dimikadshe midachrine lo. So when it comes to el nazir, right? So a nazir, when he is done with his naziris, he brings 3 korbanos. I believe an ola, a chatas, and a shlamim. Now, with the shlamim, he also brings a sal hamatzos, which I believe is chalos and rikikins, which I guess are be'etzem maifesanurs. So he brings these 3 korbanos. He also brings bread. Now, of the 3 korbanos, it's dafka the shlamim. It's dafka the el nazir, which is a shlamim, that is mikadesh the chalas and rikikin, the breads that come along with the korban. It's not even though there are other korbanos, there's an ola, there's a chatas, but it's the shlamim dafka that's mekadesh the bread. Again, ela ke el nazir, rather it's like the ram of a nazir, which is a type of shlamim. Ma el nazir, just like the el nazir, afagav the ikas v'achmachwine. There are other korbanos. There's a chatas. There's an ola. I hope that I'm correct about the chatas and the ola. I think I am, because the asham of a nazir is something else. So shlamim with the mekache, it's dafka the el nazir, it's dafka the shlamim. Even though there's lots of other korbanos, even though there's 2 other korbanos, but it's the shlamim that's mekadesh the bread. Mide achvine lo, but not any of the others. Not the chatas, not the ola. They're not mekadesh the bread. So achanami here as well, lo shna. Here as well, when it comes to the kivsei atzeres, it's the kivsei atzeres, the shalmei tzibur, that are mikadesh the shtei Halechem, not any of those other olas. V'asem minolan, how do we know by the el nazir that it is the el nazir? It's the shlamim that is mikadesh the bread. Tichsiv ve'es ha'ayil yaiseh zevach shlamim la'Hashem, that the ram will be shlamim al sal amatzis, with the breads melamed she'asal ba chova le'ayil, that the breads come with the ram, the el nazir, the shlamim. Shchitas ayil mekadshon, and that the shchita of the el nazir, of the shlamim, is what is mekadesh the breads. The fichach shachato shelo lishma lo kitchu alechem. Therefore, if the el nazir is slaughtered shelo lishma, well then the breads are not going to be kadosh, because the breads are associated with the shlamim, and if the shlamim is slaughtered as something else, well then the breads are not becoming kadosh with that other thing. Okay, so therefore, again, to answer Abayi's question, how come it is that the kivsei atzeres are what's mekadesh the shtei Halechem, and that it's the kivsei atzeres that are ma'akev the shtei Halechem, not any of those other olas? The answer is because it is just like the el nazir, just like the el nazir, there is a shlamim along with a chatas and an ola, but it is the shlamim that is mekadesh the bread, and is also ma'akev the bread, right? We said if it was slaughtered for something else, then the breads are not kadosh. So the same thing, it's also out of all these korbanos by the shtei Halechem, it's the kivsei atzeres, it's the shlamim that are mekadesh the shtei Halechem and are ma'akev the shtei Halechem, not any of all of those other olas. Friends, now we move on to the second section of today's daf. Why we burn shtei Halechem that are brought alone. According to Rabbi Akiva, we learned in the Mishnah yesterday that shtei Halechem can be brought on their own even without the kivsei atzeres. Now, says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis thought shtei Halechem habos b'fnei atzmon. When shtei Halechem are brought alone without kivsei atzeres, yunafu, so you do tnufa alone. So you'll do tnufa with the shtei Halechem without the kivsei atzeres. V'tu'uber tsurosam v'yetzu leveis ha'soifa. And then what happens? You don't eat them. You don't eat the shtei Halechem when they're brought without kivsei atzeres. Instead, you just leave them around to be posel belina until the next morning. V'yetzu leveis ha'soifa, and you burn them. Now the Gemara wants to know manafshach. Something here isn't adding up in this brayso. Ila achila asan lichlinu. Look, if you're allowed to eat the shtei Halechem when they're brought alone without kivsei atzeres, well then eat them. Why are you burning them? Either sreifa asan, and if they need to be burned because they're brought without the kivsei atzeres, well, it's sefinu la'alter. Well, then just burn them right away. So then just, why are you waiting until the next morning? If the shtei Halechem without the kivsei atzeres are not allowed to be eaten because the kivsei atzeres are matir the shtei Halechem, and if you don't have the kivsei atzeres, so sure you can offer the shtei Halechem, but they won't be mutter to the kohanim. There's no kivsei atzeres to be matir them, so you have to burn them. Okay, so burn them now. Why are you waiting? So if you hold that the shtei halechem, when brought alone, can in fact be eaten, and when they're brought alone without kivsei atzeres, you don't need the kivsei atzeres to be matir them when they're brought alone, and they can be eaten. So eat them. Why are you burning them? And if they're saying that you can't eat it because there's no kivsei atzeres, so burn them right away. Why are you waiting till the next morning? So lamalu ibur tzura, why do I have to wait till the next morning to burn it? So Amar Rabba says, Rabba olam lachila asun. So Rabba says, look, I'll tell you. In truth, you can eat the shtei halechem when they're brought alone. You can. When the shtei halechem are brought alone, you don't need the kivsei atzeres to be matir them. When there are kivsei atzeres, so the kivsei atzeres are matir the shtei halechem to be eaten by the kohanim. But when there are no kivsei atzeres, and you bring the shtei halechem by themselves, you don't need the kivsei atzeres to be matir them. You can just eat the shtei halechem. So why not eat them? Why are you burning them? Out of a concern. If we allow you to eat the shtei halechem when they are brought alone without the kivsei atzeres, there is a concern that what happens next year, maybe next year they will have sheep for the shtei halechem, for the kivsei atzeres. V'yomer, but they're going to say, well, we remember last year, ishtaken milo achanu lechem below kvasim. One second, we remember last year. Last year we didn't have sheep, and we ate the shtei halechem nonetheless. Achshav nami nechol. Now also we're going to eat the kivsei atzeres, even without being matir. No, we're going to eat the shtei halechem even without being matir by the kivsei atzeres. But they're not going to realize that the reason why they ate the shtei halechem without the kivsei atzeres was because there were no kivsei atzeres the previous year. Inu sharin lenafshayu. And therefore the shtei halechem were matir themselves since there were no kivsei atzeres. But hashtadika kvasim. But since this year there are sheep, kvasimu desharlu. It is the sheep. It's the kivsei atzeres that are being matir them. So says Rabba me'ikar adin, when shtei halechem are brought alone, you can eat them. You don't need to burn them. But the reason why we burn them is out of concern that if next year there are kivsei atzeres, they might make a mistake and they'll eat the shtei halechem even without slaughtering the kivsei atzeres, because they'll say, well, last year we ate it without the kivsei atzeres, let's eat it this year as well. But they're not realizing that when there are no kivsei atzeres, then the shtei halechem is matir itself. But when there are kivsei atzeres, it's the kivsei atzeres that are matir the shtei halechem. Okay. V'omer Rabban says, Rabban Minoah Minallah, I'll prove it to you. And here's my argument to say that the shtei halechem are eaten when brought alone. Here's my argument. Titnan, let me just drink a sip of water and we'll get back to the Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Masechta Shkalim that we had learnt about earlier in the Masechta on Daf Chaf Aleph. This Mishnah in Shkalim says, Titnan Amr Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Heid ben Bukhri b'Yavne. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Lai says that Ben Bukhri testified in Yavne, Kol kohen sheshokol einu chote, that any kohen who donates a machzis hashekel to the Beis Hamikdash is not sinning. It's okay. He could do it. Omlo Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to Ben Bukhri, Lo ki ela kol kohen she'einu shokel chote. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, Punkt verkehrt. Kohanim must contribute to the machzis hashekel. If they don't contribute to the machzis hashekel, they are sinning. It's just that the Kohanim like to darshan the following pasuk in their benefit to say that they don't bring machzis hashekel, and they say v'chol minchas kohen kol lo siyeh. I'm sorry, v'chol minchas kohen kol siyeh lo seachel. That the Kohanim like to make the following incorrect argument, which is, well, the pasuk says by minchas hakohen, minchas kohanim, that if a kohen brings a korban mincha, they don't eat it. No, nobody eats it. It's entirely burnt on the mizbeach. There's no shirayim to the kohen. If a kohen brings a korban mincha, it's entirely burnt on the mizbeach. And they make this inaccurate argument that, and they say, since we eat the shiarei korban omer, since we eat the shtei halechem, since we eat the lechem aponim, and those are menachos, so clearly they are not coming from us, because any menachos that come from kohanim are burnt, they're not eaten. From the fact that we eat the shiarei omer, that we eat the shtei halechem, that we eat the lechem aponim, clearly it's not coming from us. That's why we're allowed to eat it. And we eat it. How could they be eaten if we contributed, if they were purchased with public funds that we had contributed to? Then it would be considered like it's coming from us. It should have to be burnt. Clearly then we don't need to be contributing the machzis shekel, is their argument. Now, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, however, holds that it's a false argument, because it's only private minchos kohanim that are entirely burnt, but these public minachos, like the omer, like the shtei halechem, like the lechem aponim, even if the kohanim contributed to it, it could still be eaten. Now, hani shtei halechem eichidami. Now, this argument that they made about the shtei halechem, let's flesh that out. If we're talking about shtei halechem that were offered together with the kivsei atzeres, well then what's their argument? If their argument is, when it comes to the shtei halechem, that clearly we're not contributing to the shtei halechem because we're eating it, which the fact that we're eating it means that we didn't contribute to it, because if we did contribute to it, how could we eat it? All menachos of kohanim have to be burnt. The thing is, if the shtei halechem was being brought with the kivsei atzeres, they have no argument. Why do they have no argument? Well, because the korban toda, if a kohen brings a korban toda, he eats the breads. So we see that when you have an animal that's brought with breads, the breads are eaten. If you have a korban mincha, that a mincha alone is brought, so then, yeah, the minchas kohanim is not eaten. It's entirely burnt. But if a kohen brings a korban toda, the breads are eaten. They're not burnt. So therefore, if the shtei halechem is being brought with the kivsei atzeres, what's the argument? Just like the korban toda, its breads are eaten, so also the kivsei atzeres, the shtei halechem is eaten, even if they're contributing to it. So what's the question? We're talking about the shtei halechem that's brought together with the kivsei atzeres. Hatu toda v'lachma milo minadve kohanim ve'achlelu. After all, korban toda, kohanim could donate a korban toda, and the breads will be eaten. So here also, it's no chiddush. Of course, if you bring the kivsei atzeres with the shtei halechem would be eaten. No big deal. So elalah bebos b'fnei atzmon. Rather, it must be talking about where the shtei halechem are being brought alone. And still the kohanim are talking about how they eat the shtei halechem even when they're brought alone. So Rabbah wants to argue from there, alma lachila asyon. So we see that even when the shtei halechem are brought alone, they are eaten. Chap a shtick of more water and we'll go weiter. Amalei Abaye says to Rabbah, le'olam bebos im hazevach. Abaye says to Rabbah, I disagree with that analysis. I will argue that it's talking about where the shtei halechem are brought with the kivsei atzeres. Then what's the big chiddush? After all, the korban toda, its breads are eaten even when donated by a kohen. There's a big difference. The korban toda and its breads, the breads are not referred to as a mincha. It's lachmei toda. You bring a korban toda with it. You bring breads. Those breads are not referred to as a mincha. Whereas the shtei halechem is certainly a mincha. Shneimar, as the apostle says, "Ba'akrivchem mincha chadash Hashem v'shavosechem." That the shtei halechem are in fact referred to as a mincha. So I can actually understand their argument, even if the shtei halechem are being brought with the kivsei atzeres. I could still understand their argument to say that they should not be able to eat it if it's coming from them, since it's referred to as a mincha. Rav Yosef Amar L'Olam L'Sreifa. Now Rav Yosef disagrees with Rabbah, whereas Rabbah says that the shtey Halechem that are brought alone would be eaten, which it's just a gezerah because of the next year. Rav Yosef disagrees and says that the shtey Halechem when brought alone need to be burnt. They can't be eaten because there's no kivsei atzeres to be matir them. I assume that that's the reason why. Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef, that really I think I skipped here. Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef, the olam the sreifa asron, really the shtey Halechem should be burnt when they're brought alone. The reason why we don't burn them when brought alone is the fisha in sorf and kachim b'yom tiv, because we don't burn kachim on yom tiv. The shtey Halechem are brought on Shavuos, and therefore if there's no kivsei atzeres with them, and we're not going to eat them, and they have to be burnt, but we're not going to burn them on Shavuos, we're going to wait till after Shavuos to burn them. Abai says to Rav Yosef, midami, one second, you're comparing them to ein sorf and kachim b'yomtiv. Hosam lav mitzvasim b'chach. Ocha the mitzvasim b'chach l'sufinu midadava parvisos shom kippurim. Abai says, one second, sure, I understand that if you have like noser on Yom Tiv, or if you have korbanos that became tamei on Yom Tiv, so we're saying that we don't burn them because it's kind of a b'diavad situation. You're dealing with things that became possible. No, sir. Tameh. However, here we're talking about a korban, a shtey Halechem, that's offered by itself, completely legitimate. And the halacha is, in that case, what do? You burn it. When you have shtey Halechem offered by itself without kivsei atzeres, the halacha is you burn it. So burn it on Yom Tov, just like the Seir Yom HaKippurim and the Par Yom HaKippurim. You burn it on Yom Kippur because that's what you're supposed to do with them. Here also the halacha is, if you're going to bring shtey Halechem by itself, givaldig, and you burn it on Yom Tov. Why not? Again, Amalei Abai says to Rav Yosef, midami, can you really compare the shtey Halechem that are brought alone to the kachim that are burnt on Yom Tov, or that are not burnt on Yom Tov? Hasam lav mitzvasim b'chach. When it comes to noser, when it comes to tamei, that we're burning them, and we say wait till after Yom Tov, that's because you're not really supposed to be burning in the first place because they weren't supposed to become tamei or noser in the first place. But here by the shtey Halechem that are being brought alone, that if you don't have kivsei atzeres, that's the halacha, bring them alone. And then you burn them. Nisrafinu, burn them on Yom Tov. Just like we burn the par and sar on Yom Kippur, so you should be able to burn these too. Why are you waiting until the next morning? And Lama Rav Yosef, brother says Rav Yosef, Gzeir Shema Yizdamnu Lehem Kvasim Lacher Mikan. Says Rav Yosef, look, the shtey Halechem, without the kivsei atzeres, you burn. So why not burn it right away? Well, because what if we do end up getting our hands on some sheep, and we then will be able to bring the kivsei atzeres, but if we already burnt the shtey Halechem, well then what? We lost the opportunity to bring the kivsei atzeres. So even though the shtey Halechem, when brought alone, you burn them, but at the same time, let us wait a little bit to see if maybe we can come up with kivsei atzeres, and we'll be able to offer kivsei atzeres, and then we'll be able to eat the shtey Halechem rather than burn them. Abai says to Rav Yosef, Tenach kozmana kravosam. Okay, says Abai to Rav Yosef, but the Brisa says that when you have shtey Halechem without kivsei atzeres, you wait until the next morning and then you burn them. Abai says to Rav Yosef, if the whole thing is that we're just waiting to see if other sheep will materialize, well, at a certain point it's going to be too late. When is that? After the Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim is offered. The Talmud Shel Shachar is the first offering in the Beis HaMikdash every day. The Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim is the last offering in the Beis HaMikdash every day. Once the Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim is offered, it would be too late to offer the kivsei atzeres. So Rav Yosef, okay, I understand. Let's wait until the Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim. Maybe kivsei atzeres will materialize. But comes Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim, after the korban Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim, it's too late for kivsei atzeres to materialize. At that point, let's burn the shtey Halechem. Why are we waiting until the next morning? So again, Amalei Abai says of Yosef, Tenach Gozmana Kavosum. I can understand why we would delay the burning of the Shtei Halechem so long as we would actually potentially be able to offer Shtei Halechem kivsei atzeres that materialized. But but after the Talmud bin Arbaim is offered, Lisrafinu at that point just burn the Shtei Halechem already. Maitu b'tzurasan. Burn them after the korban Talmud bin Arbaim. Kilo, why wait till the morning? So answers the Gemara. Maitu b'tzurasan nami dikatoni tzuras hakarvasan. So says the Gemara, you're right. When we're saying wait to burn them, it doesn't mean wait till the next morning to burn them. It means wait until essentially after Talmud bin Arbaim. Instead of eating them, you're going to burn them, and you'll burn them after Talmud bin Arbaim when you can no longer potentially offer any kivsei atzeres that materialize. At that point, you will burn the Shtei Halechem in a chinami. V'amaravin says Ravi Amar le'achila asyon v'gzer mishum derabba v'lab mitayme. Rava says, I agree with Rava that me'ikar adin, the Shtei Halechem when brought alone can be eaten. And it's like Rabba said, that we're concerned, however, we say to burn it because if we allow you to eat it, then what if next year there are kivsei atzeres? You're going to say, well, last year we ate it without the kivsei atzeres, it'll be a problem. Now, Rabba tried to assert, Rabba tried to bring a proof from the Mishnah in Shkalim, which didn't really work out because Abai asked the question to say that it's not necessarily talking about where the Shtei Halechem are being brought alone. Says Rava, while I agree with Rabba that A, the Shtei Halechem can be eaten when brought alone, and that B, there's a concern, however, about what about next year if there are kivsei atzeres. I disagree with the support. The support is not from the Mishnah in Shkalim, rather, Elamikra v'Amar Mina Aminala Dichsiv mimoshvosechem taviu lechem tnufa v'gomer bikurim laHashem, that we compare the Shtei Halechem to bikurim. Ma bikurim bifnei atzman av Shtei Halechem bifnei atzman. Just like bikurim are brought by themselves, the Shtei Halechem could also be brought by themselves. Umina ma bikurim laachila av Shtei Halechem nami laachila. That just like bikurim are eaten by the Kohanim, so also the Shtei Halechem can be eaten by the Kohanim as well, even when they are brought alone. However, we make a gezerah and we say, if brought alone, burn them instead, out of concern for what about next year, if there are kivsei atzeres. Friends, that was Daf Memvav of Masechta Menachos. There were essentially two kind of large and intensive sections of Daf Memvav of Masechta Menachos. Number one, when kivsei atzeres and Shtei Halechem get locked in together, right? We had seen yesterday machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Nanis about, can you bring the Shtei Halechem alone? Can you bring the kivsei atzeres alone? However, everyone agrees that at a certain point, if you had the Shtei Halechem and you had the kivsei atzeres, at a certain point they got locked in together, and if you lose the Shtei Halechem or if you lose the kivsei atzeres, you got to start all over. When is that point? So it's either when the kivsei atzeres are slaughtered. At that point, if you have the Shtei Halechem and you have the kivsei atzeres, if you lose one of them, you have to start over. Alternatively, possibly at tenufa. It was a shaila, ended in teku. What about after the tenufa? After the Shtei Halechem and the kivsei atzeres have been waved together, is that going to establish them as a unit? It was a question. Why we burn Shtei Halechem that are brought alone, right? We said that, so we had a brayso that says that Shtei Halechem can be offered alone. We said, however, you're going to have to burn them. The question was, the brayso said you burn them the next day. So if you're supposed to eat them, so then eat them. If you're supposed to burn them, then burn them. Why kind of wait till the next day? So Rabba and Rava say that really, when Shtei Halechem are brought alone, you can eat them. However, to avoid confusion, we burn them if they're, to avoid confusion for if there are kivsei atzeres the next year. Right? If this year, when the shtei Halechem are being brought alone, we allow you to eat them. Well, then next year, when the kivsei atzeres, when the shtei Halechem are brought with kivsei atzeres, we'll say, oh, I can just eat the shtei Halechem even without slaughtering the kivsei atzeres, and you'll end up making a mistake. So therefore, in order to avoid such a mistake, we say that when the shtei Halechem are being brought alone, burn them. Rav Yosef says, no, actually, when the shtei Halechem are being brought alone, you can't eat them. You have to burn them. Okay, so just burn them immediately. Why wait till later? Well, we wait until the end of the day in case we find, right, until after the Talmud Shabbat Abayim, in case we find sheep to offer as kivsei atzeres. Right? Wait as long as we can, so that if kivsei atzeres materialize, great, we could bring the kivsei atzeres with the shtei Halechem, we could eat the shtei Halechem. So let's wait for that, suggests Reb Yosef. Friends, that was Daf Mem Vav of Masechta Menachos. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.